Welcome to our last module for operations management, and today we're going to be talking about lean thinking, which is near and dear to my heart. It's really when I work with different companies, this is what I really try to bring in, is not just develop and use different tools that we've covered throughout the course of this semester in terms of how do we improve quality and how do we think about managing, customer service and our strategy. I'm really focused on helping organizations create lean thinking, which ties in purpose, it ties in how we develop our people to kind of create this mindset for growth and for pushing us to understand where new opportunities exist, but that also focuses on our operations and developing a deep understanding of the processes that we use to deliver our product or service and how we can constantly be improving those and making them a little bit better. So today I'm just going to cover a few what I consider to be kind of key concepts around lean, which might seem a little bit disjointed, but it's really hard because it doesn't necessarily follow a logical progression in terms of do this, then do that in order to create a lean organization. It completely depends on your purpose, the work that you do in your organization. So again, I'm going to be covering a number of key concepts in terms of when you're presented with different challenges or opportunities. This is how you might want to think about starting to work with the people in your organization so you can start, again, developing this sort of thinking, not just to solve problems, but to identify opportunities to, again, create better customer service, to deliver better goods or products to your customers. So this also, I should say as we start off, this is definitely different than the content that is covered within the text. While up until this point, most of the content has followed exactly along with the chapters, there is a chapter in our book on Lean, Toyota Production System, but this is going to be a little bit different. I think the approach that's taken in the book is very tools-based. So they talk about different tools that you would see in an organization really working on developing and creating lean thinking, and the tools just fall short. It is a more holistic systems view. So what is lean at the very core? Lean is, again, it's this term that evolved from MIT researchers that went to see what Toyota was doing in the late 80s, and they termed what they saw as lean because they saw an organization that was able to do more with less. So Toyota had never used the term lean before, and they still don't even use it. They refer to what they do as the Toyota Production System, which has evolved over 7 decades of basically experimentation and improvement. And what a lot of companies try to do is they want to replicate Toyota's success in their own organization. And so they've just kind of been cherry picking different tools and trying to implement them in their organizations. And it falls short because that fundamental way of thinking about the work, of developing people, of analyzing processes, of setting goals and experimenting towards a goal, that's the core of lean. And a lot of organizations just miss that point. And they try to just take what worked in one area in Toyota and try to apply it to their own business. And while they might get some gains, again, they really do fall short. So that's a key difference in terms of an organization that really does adopt lean thinking. Kind of, it's a mindset that is, that's, I think, fundamentally believed at, the most senior levels of the organization and as well as with the frontline employees in terms of how they approach their work every day. So to get us started in talking about lean thinking, first and foremost, we have to understand what is considered value from the customer's perspective. And we talked about this earlier in the semester when we were talking about, using different mapping techniques for understanding the processes and kind of looking at the step sequence timing to do the work. Value stream map will kind of take each one of those steps and determine which one is value added versus non-value added. And that comes back to what would the customer be willing to pay for? What are those things that really, if you had to determine, what was going to be something that the customer would actually, if they had to pay for every single step, everything that you did, right? Even just walking from one place to another, the customer had to pay for it. Is that something that they would want to pay for? Right? And if not, then that's something that we want to try to figure out, can we reduce it or can we eliminate it altogether? So value from the customer's perspective also goes back to the purpose of the organization. In healthcare, we think about, providing direct patient care, communicating with the patient, right? Those are all things that the customer would be willing to pay for. When we think about goods delivery, right? You're going to pay for a product to be exactly the way you want it. You're going to pay for to make sure that you're able to get that product, right? The shipping, in a very short amount of time. You're not going to pay necessarily for things to be kind of waiting in queue or to go through a number of different checkpoints just to make sure that the quality is right. You want the quality to be right, the first time, and you want to make sure that you can get it when you want it. So again, thinking about value is really key in terms of how do we think the customer would be valuing or viewing the work that we do. So when we think about lean thinking, we also want to create a culture of rigorous continuous improvement, relentless. That is what Toyota does, is that, right, you never kind of achieve just a point in the organization where you're comfortable and you're content and you're just, you're not looking for opportunities for improvement. There's always an opportunity for improvement. And that might seem a little daunting, but it actually is really freeing, because it means that you don't have to be frustrated by, things not working correctly, all the time. You can go in, you can do the work that you want to do, and you can use your brain and you can be creative about thinking about ways to do it better. So along with that relentless approach to continuous improvement, we're really trying to focus on creating some stability and standardization within the organization. So we want to know that, there's not going to be a lot of variability, that when we come into work, when we're, working with a customer, that it's going to work for the most part the same way every time. And we can rely on our processes to make sure that we can do our jobs in delivering a product or delivering a service to the customer. Jobs and work get really overwhelming when we have a lot of variability and we're constantly trying to fight fires and, manage issues. That's when you go home at the end of the day and you're exhausted and you're wondering why you do what you do, right? Because especially I do a lot of work in healthcare. We see that physician burnout is a big issue because they're spending a lot of time, putting in documentation about trying to chase down different test results, about trying to work with the different insurers to try to make sure that, their patients are going to get covered for what they need to be covered. And they, for the most part, went into the profession because they want to provide that direct patient care and they want to work with patients and helping them get better or, stay healthy. So when we talk about stability and standardization, it's not just saying that all of the work should be, monotonous and done the exact same way. We're talking about creating stability in a lot of those processes that we do day in and day out that we don't want to have to think about. We don't want to have to waste our mental energy on trying to figure them out every single day, right? That's what we want to create stability with and standardize so that we can work on the things that we really love to do when, we go into work. We want to focus on bringing our energy and our attention to those endeavors instead of all the other stuff that has to get done. So I would argue that when we think about lean, really lean, if we think about what is lean, it's a management system, it's a scientific discipline of continuous improvement. But myself and my mentor, who worked with a Toyota supplier for a number of years, the way she likes to phrase this is lean was just spelled wrong, right? It's just missing a letter. It's missing an R. Lean is about learning, creating a learning organization, which is basically trying to understand what are our processes, what's our purpose, and making sure that our processes support that. And then how can we work with our people and continuously develop them so that they can continue to improve and to help support our organization's mission and vision. So if we think about the learning pyramid too, if we think about this course, there's just basic lecture, which, if you actually do some studies and you only have lecture all of the time, you're likely not going to remember a lot of that material that was just delivered via lecture. If you have reading that goes along with that lecture, then your retention rate's going to increase, right? If there's some sort of audio-visual thing, if we pull in videos and different types of things, that's going to actually help you remember even more. If we look about, if we pull in pieces like demonstration where we have activities, which can be really hard in an online course. But if we include some sort of discussion, right, that's going to increase retention. But really practicing then, that's the sweet spot, is how do we look and work with an organization? How do we start to pull in some of these concepts? How do we think about what that might be? And can we actually practice and experiment with maybe making a couple changes in the organization where we work or somebody that we might be working with? That's going to help increase retention. And then, of course, if you can teach it to others, then you're most likely to retain that. And that's really lean, right? We want to think about going back to the PDCA scientific method, right? Edwards Deming, all of his work was really, let's experiment with our processes, right? That's how we're going to learn how to make them better. And in lean organizations too, something that's really important is that as you continue to work and as you start to experiment with your processes and you kind of move up in the organization, you're expected to help develop the next generation of people that are coming in to these positions, or somebody new who's coming in from a different organization. You want to help bring them along, teach them about some of the work that you've done, and really help coach them as well. That will help create expertise within the organization, and again, really kind of create this lean model of just learning and experimentation. So this is another image that comes from my colleague and mentor, who is a faculty member that teaches a lot of lean work out of University of Michigan, and she refers to this as a Venn diagram, not a not a Venn diagram, but a Zen diagram, where if we think about lean, again, one of the reasons why a lot of companies have struggled to basically achieve the same level of success as Toyota is that they focus on just the process improvement piece. Just those tools, right? Pulling in Kanban or using the 5S method or visual management. There's a whole host of tools that are associated with lean. And a lot of companies, again, just focus on bringing in those tools. And that doesn't kind of give you that big picture and enable you to really create a learning organization. You have to develop your people, let them experiment, let them fail, make mistakes, because that's where you're going to learn. And all of that needs to be supported by a really crystal clear purpose, right? Going all the way back to the beginning of the semester and thinking about blue ocean strategies. What is something that we could do that is, just beyond what anybody's doing right now? And why do we do the work that we do? All of that is going to enable you to bring together people and develop them, and also enable you to do kind of a lot of experimentation and process improvement. And again, that is the heart and soul of lean thinking. So as Toyota was working on documenting their Toyota production system, they framed it in the house. So for those of you that might go on and do additional work in lean, so they have had a diagram just in terms of trying to pull together their thinking of what is a lean management system. So they use the house representation. So the house has to have a good foundation in order to stand, right? And that is creating stability in our organizations. If we go back and we think about quality, if we think about statistical process control, right, all of that is focused on kind of identifying where there's variation, assignable causes of variation, and trying to remove those. Because if we don't have stable operations, you can think about any metric. You can think about customer complaints, you can think about wait times, you can think about quality defects. If we don't have stability in those metrics, when we make improvements, right, when we experiment and we make a change to try to improve it, we're not going to actually know whether or not it had the desired effect, because we've got so much variability in our data. But if we have that stability, that's going to enable us to provide that value for the customer, right? That's the goal, is eventually getting up our roof, which is customer value. So there are two key pillars to the house of lean. One is quality, doing no harm, and the other is flow, no wait. So if we think about bottlenecks, if we think about capacity analysis, how do we set up our operations to kind of create that flow? And how do we also focus on removing some of those quality issues as well? Quality at the source, poke yoke. And at the heart and soul of that is working and developing people to do PDCA and the scientific method. All of this comes together again to kind of support that house, or the roof of the house, which is creating customer value again, which is aligned with the purpose of our organization. Another key lean concept is having SMART goals. You've probably heard of this acronym before to represent how we should be thinking about our goals. So SMART stands for having a goal that is specific. We have to know exactly what we're going to accomplish. So what exactly are we going to do? Where can we see this in action? Why are we doing it? Who's involved? It has to be measurable. We have to be able to quantify it. We have to know whether or not it's actually been achieved. It has to be attainable. So there's something to be said for stretch goals, but as we're thinking about working with our teams, we need to be realistic about setting something that we can attain. And it's also along those lines got to be time-based, right? So we want to set a goal that we know is probably a little bit out of our grasp, but that it's possible to attain, let's say, within 3 or 6 months, right? And we want to put that timestamp on it too, because that's going to help create kind of this time-bound goal, which then gives it helps better set up the work effort that has to take place in order to achieve that goal. And of course, it has to be relevant. So a lot of companies suffer from having just metric and goal overload. It creates a situation with team members where it's like there are so many things that need to be done. It makes it hard to focus on exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it's key to just have a few really relevant goals that, again, tie back to the mission and the vision of the organization. So we've already talked about waste throughout the course of this semester, and this goes back to really understanding value from the customer's perspective. So waste is, again, anything that is considered non-value added, and it goes back to our definition of purpose. What are we trying to do, and why are we doing it? Is it, to have a really high quality product or service? Do we want to make sure that, it's safe for, our customers and for our employees? Are we focused on customer satisfaction and delighting our customers with our service or our product? Are we focused on timeliness? Are we focused on being the fastest? Some of this gets back to that competitive advantage, how we're going to try to achieve that. But waste really ties in with whatever that purpose is. And when we discussed this a little bit too when we were talking about value stream mapping. When we actually map out our processes step by step, and we look at the time allocated to each one of those steps, and sometimes the wait times in between those steps. Value-added activities, when we add them up as a whole and as we take them as a percentage of the overall time effort, to deliver a product or service, usually value-added steps are 10 to 20% of our total time and effort to deliver that product or service, which is really shocking. But time and time again, when we do this with organizations, value-added only makes up a very small portion. So as we consider our improvement work, we don't want to try to take those value-added activities and do them faster. We want to focus on those non-value-added activities and completely getting rid of them if we can. One of the keys to identifying waste and improving it or reducing it or eliminating it is going to see. We always want to go see the process, the work, where it's being done. You can't just sit in a boardroom in a comfy chair and try to figure out how to address it. You actually have to go and you have to watch it, and you have to show respect for the people that are doing that work and have them be involved as well. And all of that is really important. This is a key concept in Toyota is something called Gemba. That's the Japanese term meaning the actual place where the work is done. So when we talk about lean leadership in terms of trying to understand what's happening with our processes and trying to understand what our goals should be and analyzing our processes, right, doing some of those value stream analyses are, we need to first and foremost go see, and it has to be at, the place where the work is actually being done. We have to ask why. Why do we do it this way? And not in a judgment way, in a judging way, right? We just want to have to be open and have some kind of appreciative and humble inquiry, because most of our processes have evolved over time for some reason, and they may not make sense anymore. But we certainly don't want to make the frontline workers that are doing this work day in and day out feel bad or responsible for how the system is set up now. So we need to ask why. We need to show respect, because we need to, in creating a learning organization that is open and able to improve, we have to show respect for those that are doing the work. And we have to bring them along on our journey and help develop them as well. Another key concept with Lean is visualization. We want to make things quickly and easily available, right? We shouldn't have to try to hunt down metrics and goals and try to understand where we are. That shouldn't be, just something that is kept for kind of the C-suite, to talk about in the boardroom. This has to be visual to everybody on the team at all levels, and it's got to be fairly easy to understand. So if you actually take tours of really kind of advanced or mature lean thinking organizations, you're going to see a lot of stuff on the walls where you can just be somebody who's not even a part of the work, just visiting a facility and go in and get a good sense of, all right, what are your goals? Are you achieving them? Where are you going to focus, over the next 3 months to try to figure out how to get better? Again, we talked about stability as being the foundation of that lean house, and a part of creating that stability is standards. Standard work is simply the current best documented way to safely, effectively, and efficiently do the job in a repeatable and reproducible sequence. So again, we're part of lean thinking is trying to create stability in standard work. For a lot of those processes, that's going to help reduce variability. And we know that we have to reduce variability if we're going to try to experiment and actually improve. We've got to have some sort of level baseline upon which to improve. And it's also going to help alleviate some of the mental fatigue that we have from doing some of the kind of more monotonous work throughout the day, right? If we have a process that's tried and true and we know that we can rely on it, then we can use our energy to focus on things that, again, will require more of our attention. Along with creating standard work is this notion of standardization, and that's the practice of setting, communicating, and following and improving standards, right? Standard work is, not something that just one or two people can or should develop and use, but it's something that we have to make sure that we communicate. We have to let everybody know why we have standard work, right? We found a method that works really well, right? And we're trying to create the standard for this reason because we want to achieve this goal. And getting everybody on board with that process is really important. They have to understand the purpose and they have to be a part of the process of creating that standard work as well. And standards are not set in stone, right? It's just a living document. And as you identify new and better ways to do things, then you should be updating that standard work accordingly. Another key lean concept is the notion of measurement, and this goes along with goals. There are three key types of measures. Outcome metrics. So outcome metrics might be things like we want to achieve this level of market share. Or this level of customer satisfaction. Let's just use that example. If we're in a service industry, our outcome could be, 90% customer satisfaction on some sort of, survey. Our process metric would be maybe some of those things that influence customer satisfaction, right? So things like how long, does it take for your product to be delivered to you? Or if you call with a problem, how easily are you able to resolve your problem, right? So the outcome metric is that high overarching goal. But then the process measurements are all of those pieces about what are the processes that actually enable us to achieve that goal, right? We need to be measuring those as well. Those are the ones that we can directly influence, which again should increase or improve that overall outcome metric. And then there are some balance metrics. So if we take, for example, we want to be, I guess one of the good examples here is in healthcare. Sometimes our outcome metrics are our length of stay. So we want to try to reduce the amount of time a patient is spent in an inpatient setting in a hospital. If that's our outcome metric, our process measure for that might be, well, we want to focus on measuring how long it takes from the time a patient's admitted in the emergency department to the time they arrive on an inpatient floor. Right? That's a metric that we know can have a big impact on length of stay. But our balance metric might be readmissions. So if we reduce that time that a patient's in an inpatient setting, we want to be careful that it's not negatively influencing, patients having to come back to the emergency department just a few days later because they were discharged too early. And so we always want to keep an eye out for some of those balance metrics that might be negatively influenced, right? That's something that is an unintended consequence of the work that we're doing, just to make sure that we're not doing harm to another sector of the organization. Scientific method, which we've talked about a lot throughout this course, again, coming from a lot of the work of Deming and his mentor Schuhart. This is the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, or really Plan, Do, Study, Adjust. What they found in the 90s, as Deming was working with a lot of different organizations that were trying to be lean, was that the original terminology of Plan, Do, Check, Act really didn't reinforce sufficiently. After you make a change, you have to study it. You have to actually take a number of measurements, over a period of time to determine whether or not it's made a difference. And then you're going to learn something from that. And so based on what you learn, whether it was effective or not, you should be adjusting, right? If it wasn't effective, that's okay, right? Certainly don't keep that process in place. And we see a lot of organizations do that. They'll experiment, they'll try something, they'll put a new, process in place, and maybe it doesn't work as anticipated, but then everybody continues to use it. And that's certainly not the intent. So the wording was kind of changed in the early 90s to Plan, Do, Study, Adjust, to focus on the fact that if we are going to use the scientific method to improve our work, we also need to make sure that on the back end, we're really tracking the data and we're adjusting as a result of what we find. And this is just a picture of an organization on the bottom that I had been working with. we use something called PDCA cycles. So every time a change is made, right, they have to actually put in there, what is the step that you took, right? There was some problem. What was the problem? And what is your hypothesis about what you think is actually going to make a difference? So what do you expect, right? You run an experiment then for a couple of weeks, you try a new process, and then you come back to it on the back end and say, okay, well, what exactly happened, right? Did, whatever it was that we expected to happen, did it actually happen? Of course, we're going to learn something new, right? We call these gifts. What gifts did you receive by running this experiment? And you're going to be able to learn and improve based on what you learned, right? If it was great, if it was effective, keep it in place, communicate it broadly. But if it wasn't, then you really need to be going back and revising or rethinking your process improvement. Another key concept is flow. This goes back to our concepts on capacity analysis. We really want to try to continuously look at our processes. We want to try to find those barriers to flow, right? What are those things that are holding us up? Are we finding that we've got a quality issue at a certain aspect in our process? Are there delays for some reason? Is there some missing information? And that's going to be, right, that's the bottleneck. And if we think about trying to improve capacity at a systems level, we have to constantly be trying to work towards improving or reducing the impact of that bottleneck on our process. Right? There's always going to be a bottleneck, because once you fix it in one area, then it's going to shift to someplace else, right? Then that's going to be the slowest process that's holding you up. So constantly trying to address those bottlenecks and create flow throughout our processes. Another core lean concept is quality at the source. We know we can define quality in a number of ways: user-based, product-based, manufacturing-based. But we really want to make sure that as we think about quality, we think about who is our internal customer, right? Not just the end customer who's going to get this product, but if we're working at one step in a process, we're going to pass on our product or service to the next step, we want to make sure that we're not passing on a bad product or service to the next step. So one of the concepts that we had talked about earlier in the semester as well is this notion of poka-yoke or error proofing. There's a number of different levels about how we can think about creating quality at the source, right? We can completely eliminate the error, total prevention, a defect cannot actually be made. That would be poka-yoke, right? That's where you can never leave your gas cap sitting on the top of your car anymore because it's attached, right, to the vehicle. That would be considered a poka-yoke. Something that just detects an error. We see this a lot in manufacturing, right? There might be a little laser that, in the case of Anheuser-Busch, detects what the fill level is on each bottle coming out of the filler. That's detecting the error, right? But it's not preventing it from happening. So that would be a level 2 kind of approach to error proofing. Detect the defect with self-checks would be level 3, right? So if there's some sort of kind of visual inspection on the line. And level 4 would be process improvements, simple things like checklists that are helping us to kind of get into that standard rhythm, but it's certainly not preventing or detecting when an error had happened. But a lot of organizations still aren't even at level 4, right? They don't have checklists or visual aids or things that are happening to ensure quality. We want to start there. We want to continue to work up towards level 1. That would be the ideal. Again, and talked about the importance of the people part of lean, really true lean organizations that create, the kind of learning environment where you're constantly improving. A fundamental piece of that is coaching, right? You have a mentor who's helping you kind of set your own personal challenges for you and your team, and letting you experiment and helping coach you along the way. Just like if you've, played a musical instrument or played a sport, in lean organizations, you should have somebody who's coaching and supporting you. If you don't, that's an indication that you are not really working in a lean organization. So if you think about your own organizations, right, try to find a coach or mentor who's going to help develop you and help develop your thinking. And then when you get to a certain level, the expectation is that you're going to do that for somebody else as well. If we think about lean in terms of, actually a lot of organizations still today, again, they focus on the tools, but they also focus on using lean tools just to solve problems. And we don't just want to focus on solving problems all the time. It's important, but we also want to continue to raise the bar. So I sent out recently an email about, Elon Musk and trying to improve, not only meet expectations, their initial expectations for what their production rates would be, but now they're raising that bar, right? And so they're kind of shutting down and reassessing and doing a lot of process improvement work because they have to raise that goal. They have to raise the target. So if we think about lean for a growth mindset, it's not just trying to meet, our baseline expectations, but it's also trying to raise that bar. Once we've met that expectation, then we need to raise it a little bit further, right? We need to create a gap between where we are and where we want to be. Okay, with that, this is for my in-classroom section. If you have an opportunity, check out the TED Talk on the Marshmallow Challenge. It's a great representation of how we think about the importance of prototyping and experimentation for improvement, right? Because we've all been through school. Unfortunately, an unintended consequence of us going to school is that we are all conditioned to kind of focus on getting the right answer. And when we put so much pressure on ourselves in getting just the right answer, we lose the ability to experiment and play. And that's where a lot of the learning takes place. So please, if you get a chance, check out the TED Talk, the Marshmallow Challenge. And if you have any questions about lean thinking or what it means for your organization or how you could be thinking about better supporting your organization or somebody that you're working with, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to have a discussion about it.